Yeah, Noelle works for the University of Georgia. She has created her own program. She is extremely smart, working on her doctorates right now in hemp, correct?
Yep, yep.
And she has a ton of background with herbs. And what was your major again for your master's?
Um, for my master's, it was horticulture.
Horticulture. Yeah. So I'm just going to let her take it away. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share with you. I have a very strong and passionate love for medicinal herbs, and anyone else that also is interested in learning about medicinal herbs or wanting to work with them, you're my friend too. So, yeah, we're going to be going over, well, I guess I'll do just a quick intro, just to give you a little bit of background about my experience. I have been at UGA for a long time for my undergrad and master's and now my PhD. And since I've been at UGA, I've gotten involved with a student teaching farm called U Garden, and we grow all different kinds of fruits and vegetables. A lot of the produce that we grow gets donated to families in need in the community and kind of distributed through aid organizations. And we also have a medicinal herb program that I manage where we grow. This year, we're growing 1/2 acre of medicinal herbs. We've kind of scaled up over the years, and then we dry them and put them into a line of herbal products that we sell in the community. So I'm really passionate and interested in growing medicinal herbs, drying them, processing them, and then making them into product. For kind of my school background, I did my master's in horticulture, and I got to work with a medicinal herb called holy basil, and it was really awesome. I got to do like an interdisciplinary project between horticulture and food science and look at how to grow the holy basil, and then I got to distill the essential oils and then analyze them. And so it was cool to be able to combine horticulture and chemistry, and really fitting for medicinal herbs because these herbs contain chemicals, phytochemicals that have activity on the body that can help to promote health or prevent disease. And so basically I've kind of taken that skill set, and then I started my PhD last summer, and I'm working with hemp, another really wonderful medicinal herb, and looking at specifically drying. So I'm drying it over a range of different drying methods. And then analyzing the chemistry, like the essential oils or the terpenes and the cannabinoids like THC and CBD, and seeing how that changes during different drying methods to try to give some basically information to growers about the best way to dry hemp for really high quality final product. Also use medicinal herbs in my daily life. I drink probably like 6 cups of herbal tea a day, and I moisturize with herbal infused oils. And yeah, I'm just a lover of all things herbs, and really excited to share some more about our program at U Garden, which is called U Garden Herbs. Here's the things I'm going to talk about today, reasons that I want to grow or that I like to grow herbs, our herb production process, what we do at U Garden, some different tips for drying and processing if any of you have never worked with herbs before, or maybe have some questions or started on your journey. I'll be talking about that. Just a little bit about record keeping. And then if you are interested in growing herbs for sale, I'm going to talk about just a couple of potential markets that you would have for them, and kind of some of the things that we've tried over the years and what's worked well for us in terms of what we do with the product after we've harvested it. And then some extra resources at the end for if you're wanting to learn more. So for me, here are some of my main reasons to grow medicinal herbs in any kind of farm or garden setting. It definitely adds diversity in a lot of different ways. They can attract a lot of pollinators. All of our medicinal herbs have a ton of different, native pollinators, bees, butterflies, moths, all different kinds of things. So it's great to have that food source for them, just having, diversity of plants. And then also for a farm or anyone that's wanting to sell these products, it also adds to diversity of income. Because with medicinal herbs, even though it does require some extra processing at the back end, where you're drying it or things like that, then you do have like a shelf-stable product, which is awesome. It's nice because medicinal herbs, you do have a nice mix of annuals and perennials. Yeah, so basically, a lot of vegetables are just annuals, but perennials, you can plant them once and then harvest them year after year. Yeah, like I said, it can be an additional source of income and a value-add product to sell all year round. So those are some of the reasons that we grow medicinal herbs at our farm. And I wanted to share this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, and it says, "Plants are in essence ecological medicines. They do not require expensive factories to make them. They do not discharge pollutants into the environment. They have far fewer side effects internally and externally. They are renewable, and the knowledge of their use is not held in the hands of a few experts, but like plants and ecosystems, is diffused throughout the cultures that use them. And that was said by Stephen Herod Buhner, who's a really respected herbalist, and just fully agree, with this. And this is kind of the inspiration for why I do the work that I do. And the picture behind this quote is actually of our field this summer. So the herbs are just looking really nice. It was at the sunrise one morning at the farm. If anyone is interested in selling herbs, there are different options. Direct retail, might be online sales, or maybe not now. We used to do a lot of on-farm events, and now we're not doing that as much. We might do like on-farm pickup, but space people out. Wholesale is another option where you're basically taking some products, selling it to like a retailer or something like that, who then are going to sell it to the customer, or work with them in bulk, like just single herbs in bulk, either fresh or dried. And I guess I kind of have this perspective of like having some type of herb business, but I'm sure that there are many of you out there that also don't want to do this as a business, but want to grow herbs for personal use. So I should have written that on the slide, but just want to acknowledge that too. If, maybe you want to grow it in your garden so that you can make your own medicine or dry your own herbs to have tea or make tinctures, or other different kinds of herbal products. And those would be, also great options for what to do with any herbs that you grow. And yeah, you basically can use them fresh or dry. And I'm going to go into how we could do the drying process. Medicinal herbs are a little bit different than growing herbs than growing vegetables. Sorry, medicinal herbs are different than growing vegetables. And here are a few of the different ways that we're going to treat them differently. There is going to be a variation in harvesting. So different medicinal herbs, you're going to harvest different plant parts. They're going to be harvested at different times of the year. There's going to be different frequencies of harvest. Some herbs you might harvest every 2 days, like maybe you would okra. Other herbs are harvested every 6 weeks, because we harvest, the leaf and flower, and then every 6 weeks, it reflowers, and then that's when we harvest it. Other herbs we just harvest like once a year. There's a lot of diversity, a lot of variation. Medicinal herbs also require a lot of times some kind of processing or drying steps. Medicinal herbs, we are looking more for the phytochemistry. So we do care about yield, the biomass, or the amount of plant material that we're harvesting. We do care about that. What we're really interested in for these medicinal herbs is, and to see the quality of them, is like how potent they are, how much of the phytochemicals are in there. So with medicinal herbs, we're looking, some different names are, phytochemicals or secondary metabolites, basically compounds that are produced in the plant, not for its growth and development, but to kind of add protection to the plant. And a lot of times, I don't know, maybe we think that they're producing it for us, but the plant produces these compounds like essential oils to protect it from disease, or to attract pollinators, or deter pests, or improve its ability to survive in its environment. And a lot of times with vegetables, we kind of want to give it fertilizer and treat them very well so that they'll produce a lot of mass. But with herbs, it's good actually if they get a little bit stressed, because then they're producing more of these compounds. So kind of the thought process around growing herbs is a little bit different than some other crops. Storing it is a little bit different also, because we're storing dried product. And then depending on what you're wanting to do with the herbs, if you want to make it into a business, then there's also this idea of record keeping, which is a little bit more detailed than record keeping you might do for vegetables. So those are some differences. If you're interested in growing herbs, there's lots of different ways you can do it, a lot of different ways you can plug it in, but kind of the two main categories are field grown. So if you have an area that's open sun, and you can have basically, open area, there's a lot of herbs that do really well in full sun. And then there's also some herbs or, other medicinal plants, or even medicinal fungi. Like here we have forest grown options. So this is reishi mushroom. That's a really potent medicinal mushroom that we grow on logs in the forest at Ute Garden, in the different microclimate on the farm. And so what's also cool about medicinal herbs, there's lots of different options for forest grown medicinal herbs. If you have an area that you can't grow traditional vegetables or other things, kind of a wooded area, there are some great options for you if you are interested in medicinal herb production, where you can kind of utilize that space where you couldn't use it for anything else. And at the end, there's actually like a whole book written by a professor named Janine Davis. She's in North Carolina, and she's written a whole book on forest medicinals. So if you're interested in that, there's some great resources out there. This was pre-COVID times. This picture was taken, and I just love it so much, and I miss being able to, have all these volunteers out together. Now we do still have volunteers, but everyone's, wearing masks and spaced out. And not as many. But yeah, I just kind of want to walk you through our process of how we do it at UGarden. The first things we think about are, starting seed. A lot of times we'll start them in the spring to plant out in the beginning of the summer, all of our summer annuals. Here's our seed list of typical seed sources where we get our seeds from. Strictly medicinal seeds. They have a lot of medicinal seed options. They're the best selection of any seed company that I can find in the US. They have an amazing selection of medicinal plant seeds. I like Southern Exposure Seed Exchange for Southeast growing. They've got some medicinal herbs, specifically their hibiscus I really like, and their holy basil and their chamomile I've really had good luck with. So I like their company for what I can find from them, and it's nice because they're in the Southeast. And Johnny seeds I really like for culinary herbs, because a lot of times they have varieties that have disease resistance or other kind of special traits, especially to survive in the South. So things like parsley and cilantro we get from Johnny's seed. With medicinal herb seeds, a lot of them will require, not a lot of them, some of them might require some kind of special seed treatment. Some of them might require a heat. So if I'm trying to sow, for example, holy basil seed in the beginning of the year or kind of early, and to have a nice big plant to plant out, at the end of April after our last frost, really need to start them on heat mats because they prefer really hot, not really hot, but warm conditions to germinate. So things like ashwagandha and holy basil will sow on a heat mat. Some seeds require soaking, some seeds require scarification, some like breaking of the seed coat to help it to germinate, or stratification. An example of stratification is basically simulating what that seed might experience in nature by, being subjected to cold for a period of time. So one example, medicinal herb that we grow is blue vervain. And if I try to sow the seed right away, nothing will germinate. But if I put them in damp sand in the refrigerator for 6 weeks, then we get really good germination. So when you're looking at seeds from medicinal herbs, it's good just to kind of have these ideas in mind and look at the seed packet and just make sure that, before you sow it, you are aware of any special treatment that it might need. And sometimes it's trial and error, because the seed packet for the blue vervain said to stratify it for 3 weeks. And I didn't get as much germination as the 6 weeks. And so I just created like a little experiment to try out different time points and found 6 weeks are the best. So sometimes it takes some experimenting too. And if it doesn't work right away with the instructions on the seed packet, maybe just try a few other things before you give up. And then sometimes you might give up. I've got certain seeds that lemon balm, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I can't figure out how to germinate lemon balm. So, sometimes I just let other people do it. Another form of, getting new plants is through propagation, where basically you take a cutting. So here's some rosemary, and we just took a 6-inch cutting, and then we put them in a glass of water. And then after a couple of weeks, roots will sprout out the bottom. We can put that in a tray, and then it will grow into a new plant. So that's a really easy way to do that. And here's some plants that we use for propagating. On a larger scale, if we have too many cuttings to do it in a glass of water, we will actually take the cutting, make them a little bit smaller, maybe like a 3 or 4-inch cutting, again, stripping off the bottom half, and then we'll actually stick it into a tray with soil, or like a 50-cell tray with soil, and then we'll put it under a mist system to keep it consistently damp or consistently moist until they develop roots, and then we'll move them out of the mist system. But nettle, lemon balm, comfrey root, so we actually dig it up and take cuttings of the roots instead of the above ground part to propagate that plant. Rosemary, lemon verbena, rose, and elderberry, we take shoot cuttings for all of those to germinate. So that's it always seems like magic every time I do it, because I'm, taking this plant and then getting a whole new plant just from a little piece of it. So that's pretty awesome. Something else we've been trying out is separating out warm season and cool season medicinals. So some annuals that just never did good for us or never did well for us, because we're actually zone 8A. We bumped up to that from 7A or 7B maybe in the last year or so. But we're pretty warm, and have a really long growing season. And some of these medicinals don't really do well in the heat, especially chamomile and calendula. And so what we've started doing is actually sowing the seed in August, planting them at the end of September, and then letting them overwinter in the field for blooming the next year. And we found much better results with that versus, trying to plant them at the same time as our summer annuals. So if you've been trying to grow calendula or chamomile and it hasn't worked out for you, maybe that could be an option. Actually, cilantro does really well with this too, putting in cilantro at the end of September, and it doesn't last all the way till next year, but then we get a really good harvest of it in the fall. So that's another way to kind of play around with medicinal herbs, is planting them at different times of year and seeing how they do. We're an organic farm. We're not certified organic because we're still working on the paperwork. It's just a lot of paperwork to do, but we use organic practices. And so if, we do soil tests at the beginning of the year, and we will, test for things for nutrients. And then here are some of the things that we'll add. Compost, we use chicken feather meal as our source of nitrogen. And then depending on the soil test, we might add some other minerals, and we will use potassium sulfate, calphos, boron, and lime if we need to, depending on what the soil test results say. And then when we plant the plants in the ground, we will overhead water them in with some fish emulsion that's, been diluted to the correct concentration. And we also use fish emulsion to water our transplants, like when they're in trays. When they're growing, we'll fertilize them once a week until they're ready to get into the ground. So that's how we handle our fertilizing. And then this is what we use for irrigation. We use a 1/2-inch drip tube that we put on raised beds that we make with a tractor. And then they have inline emitters that are spaced every foot and put out about 1 gallon an hour. This year's actually been a really wet year. For the most part, we had a couple of weeks that it was dry, but we haven't had to irrigate much this year at all because we've actually had a lot of rain. So once we are, have the fields ready and have our plants, then, usually depending on the crop, usually, mid-April to end of April, we're doing all of our summer annual planting. Other times of year, we might be planting perennials depending on when it's best for them to get established. But yeah, we're actually figuring out a lot with spacing right now, because you might have spacing on the seed packet, but then if you're growing for production, you might actually space them a lot closer together. So we are growing ashwagandha this year, and what I've been told is we need to plant them 3 feet apart, but I've been talking to my boss, who's a horticulture professor, and he is wanting me to experiment next year with actually planting them a lot closer together, because I'm growing them, kind of for more production, high production, and they're gonna be easier to harvest and go almost look more like carrots, is what he was saying, when they're planted really close together. So that's definitely something that I'm wanting to play around more with spacing. It's easy to see what's on the seed packet and say like, oh, this is how I have to do it, but I think there's a lot of room for experimentation with spacing, depending on how long you want the plant there and how much production you want out of it and things like that. Yeah, so that's just something I'm learning right now and excited to experiment more with. But yeah, what we usually do is we just stretch out a tape measure, and then, whatever we've determined our spacing to be, then we'll just follow the lines on the tape measure. All right. We do use fabric in the aisles of all of our plots, and that's really helped us a lot with not having to weed as much. It is definitely an investment, but then we use it for many years after that. We're going to do our best to use it for at least 3 or 4 years once we put it down. Or, for the annuals, we'll take it up and then reuse it in another field, and the perennials, it'll be there for 3 to 5 years. And then in the perennial plot, we will mulch in between the plants with pine straw. And that just kind of helps with, weeds staying down and stuff like that. In the annual plot, we really haven't needed to use mulch because that's getting torn out at the end of the season. We just kind of leave it bare. We don't, we still have fabric in the aisles, but we don't mulch the annuals. And we do wash all of our annuals after we harvest them. So any dirt that splashes up will just get washed off. Pest control, we've never really had to spray anything in the herb garden. We usually, we try to mitigate problems with pests through several different means. One of them is if we have a medicinal herb that has a lot of pest problems, typically we just won't grow it anymore. Burdock is an example of that. We used to grow burdock, which is a medicinal root or a medicinal plant that we harvest the root from. And we had a lot of pest issues with it where it would, I think it was like, I forget what it was that was on it, but it would cause the root to rot. And we tried several different things, several years in a row, nothing really worked. And basically I just kind of decided to not grow it anymore and then grow more of what grows really well in our area. So things like hibiscus and lemongrass and holy basil, those are herbs that do really well for us. So we're going to grow more of those and then, stop growing the things that really require a lot of intensive management to produce, because I'm just not interested in trying to make something happen that doesn't want to be there. So everyone's got, different ways of looking at it, but that's kind of how I like to see it, is just grow more of what wants to grow here. And, medicinal herbs, because they've got these high concentrations of these chemicals in them, it actually a lot of times makes it easier to grow. Sometimes they can be harder to get established, but then once they're established, medicinal herbs are very easy to grow because they kind of got these built-in protection mechanisms that a lot of other crops don't have, which is really nice. And, if they do get a little bit of pest pressure, especially as it's getting closer to harvest, I kind of don't see that as a bad thing. As long as we're still getting enough material to harvest, if it's kind of stressed a little bit, that's just going to stimulate the plant to produce more of these compounds that make it a higher quality plant. So really the only time we would spray for any pest is if it's a crop that, we need a lot of because we're growing it for a product. And if we don't do something, then the entire crop is going to get lost. So one time 3 years ago, I had to spray our stinging nettle with some BT because it was getting eaten up by worms. But that's really the only time. So I know that's not everyone's experience, and there's definitely medicinal herbs that have pest issues, but I just kind of, try to grow what wants to grow in my area. And we've been really lucky to not have any disease or pest issues. Okay, I kind of talked about this already. What we're looking for are these secondary metabolites. And they are produced in the plant in response to stress. So we are constantly balancing yield and quality because we want to harvest a lot of material, but then we also want that to be really high quality. So we make sure we don't over fertilize or over water, and kind of just do it really moderately so that, like I said, we get a good yield, but then we also get a lot of good, secondary metabolites. Okay, so for harvesting, we think about what part of the plant we want to harvest, what time of year, and then how does it need to be processed and dried. So how I think about harvesting, there are different plant parts that you could harvest depending on the herb. So it might be a flower, it might be an aerial part, so that would be leaf and flower. It could be just the leaf or just the root or just the fruit, different options. And so how I think of it is we want to harvest when the energy is going towards that plant part. And I'll give some examples of that in a minute. And then also something to think about is window of harvest. Some things can wait to be harvested. Lemongrass, for example, it doesn't flower where I live. It's a summer annual, not a perennial like in the tropics. And it's just the grass. And so you could actually let it grow all season and not harvest it, and it would be totally fine. Other things like roses, for example, if you miss a day on harvesting, they're going to degrade and you're going to have to compost those. So window of harvest is something to think about when you're, planning your herb garden and planning harvest. And then if you're wanting to dry anything, then planning your drying space is also going to be important. And I'll kind of go over these different things. So here are some examples of some medicinal herbs where you would harvest the bud or the flower. This is chamomile on the left and roses on the right. And ideally you're harvesting it, just as it's opening and not after it's been open for several days, because once it's been open for several days, it's been pollinated and then it's going more into fruit production and you're not going to get as many of the medicinal compounds of the flower that you want. So thinking about when you're harvesting the bud or the flower, just as it's opening is when it's the perfect time to harvest. Leaves, on the other hand, you want to harvest them before they go to flower, because once they go to flower, the essential oil chemistry changes, the other compounds in the plant change, and there's kind of accepted profiles, I guess chemical profiles of certain medicinal herbs where you want them at a certain stage. So here are some examples of herbs where you just want the leaf. On the left here, we have lemon balm, and on the right, we have lemongrass. And those are two of my favorite medicinal herbs. I don't know, I've probably got 15 favorite medicinal herbs, but they both grow really, really well in our area and really lovely lemon scent. Another example is the aerial part. So this is the leaf and flower. This is holy basil. This is an example of a medicinal herb that you would harvest the leaf and flower. And like I said before, when it flowers, the essential oil chemistry changes and different chemical changes happen in the plant, and sometimes you want those changes. So holy basil is the most medicinal when it's right in the middle of flowering. And how we kind of do that, especially with the mints, we have the flowers opening up the flower stalk. And how I would judge when it's ready to harvest is when I look out at a row of holy basil, and most of the flower stalks, blooms are opening up about halfway. And that's kind of at the peak of flowering. And that's when we'll harvest and dry it. Another thing, I don't know if any of you have worked with this or are familiar, but hibiscus is one of my favorite medicinal herbs. The whole plant is edible. The leaves are edible and taste really tart. The seed pods are edible. And then what we actually harvest to dry down for tea is the calyx, which is basically the flower bud wrapper. I heard someone describe it like that the other day, and I loved it. But it's this red thing that you see on the screen, and you can see as it goes up the stalk that that these red pods get smaller. So basically, it starts at the top, it flowers and gets pollinated. The flower falls off, the calyx closes back up around the forming seed pod, and then as it matures, the calyx will swell, and then the calyx kind of at the bottom of the stalk, that's what we would harvest, and then we would cut it and pop out the seed that's inside for compost, and then this kind of like fleshy red coating, that's what we would dry for tea. It's also called flor de Jamaica, and it's used I know it's used commonly in Jamaica, a lot of times in Mexico and Hawaii. It's a really popular herb and really common, and does really, really well in kind of the southeast area. So this is great. I love the seeds of hibiscus from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, and there's a lot of kinds of hibiscus. The medicinal one is Hibiscus sabdurifa. Another plant part that you might be harvesting is the root or the rhizome. So this is some dandelion that we harvested, and when I do root harvest, I always wait until after the first freeze or right around the first freeze, kind of in the change of seasons. And that's because when we get a freeze, then a lot of the nutrients from the above ground part of the plant, they go down into the roots. And so that's when the roots are the most juicy and the most sweet and the most medicinal. So this dandelion we harvested last fall, I guess around mid-October, end of October. And the roots, we do have to, watch out and like wash them really well. But yeah, that's when we would harvest roots. Another option would be fruit. These are, on the left here, I have a reishi mushroom. I guess it's kind of the fruiting body of the mushroom. I don't know if I would technically consider it a fruit. But on the right, we have elderberry, kind of a real fruit. But yeah, those would be just, I guess on a case-by-case basis to know when it's right, to make sure that you're getting it at the right time. So I kind of already talked about this. Some herbs are harvested every other day. So some examples of those are the flowers. A lot of times the flowers, because you're harvesting them regularly as they're opening. So chamomile, calendula, and rose are some examples of herbs that will be harvested every other day. Some are harvested every 4 to 6 weeks, either because that's how quickly they regrow, or that's when they start flowering again. So holy basil, it flowers typically every 4 to 6 weeks. Lemongrass, you're not getting it when it's flowering, but if you wanted to get more biomass throughout the year, you could harvest it every 4 to 6 weeks because it regrows really quickly. And then some herbs like nettle and plantain, it might just be harvested once or twice a year, but you're not getting it consistently as it's regrowing. We do wash most of our herbs unless it's flowers, especially if it's harvested below like 18 to 12 inches. And then if there's any dirt that's splashed up onto it or any insect droppings or anything like that. And so we do have a 2-bin wash station that we use, and we just have tap water or city water. And so we'll fill up, or we'll put enough water in the bottom of the bins to wash, and then we'll just switch out the water whenever it gets dirty. And we'll have our bin from the field, we'll wash it twice, and then we'll usually dry it on screens. So some herbs do require some kind of processing before drying. So this is an example of some dandelion. They can either be chopped up with a knife. We're starting to scale up some different things. And so we've actually started using a leaf mulcher to break up our roots for drying. So that's worked really well. Like I said, this is some dandelion that we tried last year. And ginger is another example of a root that's something you want to process before drying. This ginger we actually hand sliced, because if you try to dry an entire root, a lot of times the inside of it's going to mold or rot before the whole thing can dry out. And if you have a whole piece of root, it's actually going to be really difficult to break down. Like if you want to powder it or process it after it's dried. I had some large chunks of dandelion that I dried, and then I broke a coffee grinder trying to grind it up. So that's another reason why you want to break it into smaller pieces before you dry it, so it's easier to work with after it's dried. And then I kind of shared about this, but this is the hibiscus calyx that it looks like after processing, after we've removed the seed pod. Okay, so here's some pictures of us drying. Again, this is from last summer where we had a group of volunteers come, and I'm going to talk about how we do drying at the farm, but we are on kind of a larger scale. And if any of you are on the home scale or interested in growing medicinal herbs kind of for home use, here are some different options for, kind of smaller scale stuff. So some things that I've done in the past are hanging up bundles of herbs on a curtain rod, and then just kind of closing the curtain so the sun doesn't hit it. I've also used kind of like a cookie cooling rack to get airflow around the material and just kind of dried it in my kitchen. You could put it into a paper bag and hang it up somewhere, or dry it in a bag. This is another thing that I was really proud of, a setup that I did, is I got an accordion clothes drying rack and set that up, and then just had some leftover window screens that I found that I slid onto the racks of the drying rack. And then I also took bundles of herbs that I kind of put around it. So here are some great, really, really accessible options for if you're drying on a home scale. And then if you're wanting to dry on a larger scale, really the things that you want to think about are that it needs to be dry. So we will basically control the humidity in our dry room and try to set it at 30% humidity, so that's really dry in there and it's just continuing to pull the moisture off of the plant material. And it also needs to be dark, so you don't want any direct light or even a lot of natural light coming in, because light can degrade the plant material and have the chlorophyll break down, so it turns brown faster. So ideally it's dry and dark. Of course, clean, making sure you're in a clean area, making sure there's good airflow. So we have some, fans in the room to help circulate the air. And then you want it to be warm. So ideal conditions for a lot of medicinal herbs are dried between like 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which probably seems like really warm to you. But what happens is the heat will help to drive off the moisture from the plant material quicker, and then the dehumidifier can get it out of the room, and that allows it to dry really well, maintain the color, maintain the quality, and then also kind of dry it fast enough where you're not going to have mold growth. If you dry it at lower temperatures, it'll still be fine. It'll just take longer to dry, and then depending on how it's dried and how it's stored, you might have more potential problems with like mold or, you know, fungus growth or something like that. Sometimes you might use like a dehydrator that does run hotter. I think most dehydrators run between, like, lowest setting would be like between 1 and 115 or something like that. So you could use a dehydrator, but you would want to just make sure that you're checking it constantly so that once it was dry, that you get it out immediately, so you don't, you know, dry it too much or, you know, lose some of that quality. Another option, if you don't have a lot of space for drying, is to actually bundle your herbs and hang them up. So really kind of like low-tech solution. We have a cattle panel that we hung up in our dry room just from wires from the ceiling. And then we bundled the herb and then made S-hooks out of some wire, and then, you know, hooked one end into the bundle and then hooked it over the metal rack. And that's worked really, really well. On this rack right here, it's about I think it's a 10-foot long section, and we were able to bundle and hang, this is about 200 pounds of holy basil on this rack right here. So if you don't have a lot of space and you have time, another option is bundling herbs. And of course, you're probably not going to be harvesting 200 pounds of any individual herb in any kind of, you know, soon or quickly, or I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you probably won't have this much material. But it's great even on a smaller scale if you don't have a lot of space but want to dry some herbs. So really, you know, what we've used in the past is, this is just like a room at the farm, and we, you know, basically just had a dehumidifier and some fans in there. What we've used now this year actually is, because we continue to scale up, is we're using a shipping container, and it isn't insulated. We still need to insulate it. We just didn't have the funds to do it. So we just painted it with like a food grade paint. But we have a dehumidifier. This is a commercial dehumidifier that we use. On a smaller scale, you know, a smaller size would definitely work. This is a 220 pint dehumidifier. And then we've just got some fans. And this has worked great for us this year. Again, it's kind of just like a box that you make sure is dark and dry and clean with airflow, and you're good to be drying herbs. We do have an air conditioning and heating unit in here, and we've just set it to 88 degrees. That's as high as it'll go. So during the day, it'll get hotter, you know, when the sun warms it up, and then overnight, it just keeps it from going below 88 degrees. The other thing I will mention is we actually use rolling racks. So for some of our drying, these are just like baker's racks that we get from a restaurant supply store, and then screens that we had made to fit basically, or the size of a sheet pan that slides on there. So that's nice. We can roll the racks out and, you know, roll them back in. And then this year we've started on the right here, you see that we've got some metal shelves that we also got from the restaurant supply store, and then just, you know, load material onto them and, you know, brush them off at the end. So those are stationary, but we can fit a ton of material on those, and that's worked really well. So if you have any kind of room that you could kind of make into a dry room where you can, you know, get it a bit warm in there, even just having like a metal shelf would be perfect for drying herbs. And then how I tell when they're done is I bend the stem, and if it snaps, that's when I know it's dry. A lot of times the leaves will dry before the stems do, and if you package up your material before the stems are fully dry, then you're going to get some mold in your material. So that's the best way, is when you break it and the stem snaps, that's how you know it's dry. And then, you know, we just really think about, you know, once it is dry, you want to get it out of that drying unit as quick as possible, because if it stays in there a really long time, especially if it's at that warm temperature, it's going to start degrading. You know, you want to have it in there just until it dries and then get it out. So, yep, here's some pictures of us drying. We used to put our finished dried herbs in like 1 gallon bags, and then, quickly we had to scale up. So, what we use now is actually food grade 55-gallon drum liners. And that's how we store our unprocessed herbs. So, herbs that still have the stem or still need to be broken up. And then we go through a processing step. So a lot of times with leafy herbs, we have to strip the leaf and flower from the stem. So again, this was last year before COVID, where we were all working together. And a lot of times what we'll do is like process by hand, but we are working on trying to get a little bit more efficient this year. And so we've actually built these screens with stainless steel screen at a couple different sizes, like 1/2-inch screen and 1-inch screen, to be able to kind of like, push our herbs through and then have the screen do some of the processing for separating the stem from the leaf material. And this is helping us to go faster. We're, always trying to figure out how to, keep the quality, but continue to do things more efficiently. So this is what we're trying out this year. And like I said, it's a trade-off. So what we're trying to do is figure out how we can keep quality, also managing space, and then maximizing efficiency. Here are some pictures of some other smaller screens that I saw at a farm workshop that I went to, Gentle Harmony Farm. They're a farm in North Carolina that grows herbs, and they do a farm workshop every year. And they use, smaller size mesh screens because they have, they do cut and sift products, which means that all of the leaf material is a uniform size. We try to have our leaf material a little bit larger because we do loose leaf teas. But anyway, those are just some different options. I know this is a lot of information, and I guess what I'm trying to do is just give you an overview of like different steps of the process and different things to think about, so you can brainstorm and say, hey, here's what I have, even on a home scale, here's what I have, and here's how I can make what I have work for me and my needs, So that's kind of the goal of why I'm sharing all these different things, to give you ideas and hopefully some inspiration about things that you can try at home. So processing dried herbs, this lemongrass, what we used to do, it's really easy. You could use a paper cutter, or you could use a pruners or a scissors to cut up your lemongrass or any kind of broadleaf crop like oats, oat straw, or lemongrass, or, leafy crops like comfrey. You can break those up using your hands or scissors or things like that. But what we're trying to do on a larger scale is use this leaf mulcher to break it up, and that's been working really well. So yeah, again, this is just kind of an idea of some things that we've tried to make our process go a little bit more efficiently. Once you've, gotten your herbs and you've dried them and you've processed them, then they need to be stored. So this is what we used to do for storage. We would store them in 1/2-gallon mason jars, or we'd store them in like 1 to 3, or I think these are 2-gallon bags on the right. And you just want to store them in a cool, dark place. So we had them in cabinets, and then had them in a climate controlled room, where the humidity and the temperature was controlled. But now, since we've been scaling up, we've actually started storing in these gray tubs. They're gray Rubbermaid tubs. I think the is called Brute is the kind of subcategory, but they're 14, 20-gallon tubs, and we just get them on Amazon. And they've worked really well. We don't, we just have them in the tub with the lid on, and then keep them in the climate controlled room. So that's how we do our storage. And then basically with our products, we don't use any herbs that we've stored for more than a year, so basically we use up most of the herbs that we grow with our products for that year. And then if we have any leftovers, we'll donate them. And then, start over with the next year. So we don't keep any herbs for more than a year, and most dried herbs will stay medicinal for 2 years. So we've, stored it well, we'll sell the product, and then someone can have it in their home for up to a year, have it still be medicinal. And then after that, we encourage people to go through the product and not store it for years in their house, but that's how we deal with storage. And then I kind of talked about this earlier. If you're wanting to sell medicinal herbs, here are some potential markets. So like I said, I already went through this earlier, but I'm just going to go through some examples of things that we've tried. So here are some examples of some value add products if you're interested in making a product to sell. Herbal tea, seasoning mix, soap, lip balm, salve, tinctures, vinegars, shrubs, or brews, hydrosols. There might be some herbs in here that, or some preparations in here that you're not sure of. So I can definitely, address these if during the question and answer time, if you're wondering, what some of these are, but those are some examples of value add products that you could make with the herbs that you grow. And then just kind of a quick, not caveat, but just, I just want to draw attention to the fact that if you are making herbal products for sale, it would be good to do some research on good manufacturing practices, and then wanting to maybe seek out some kind of herbal training, just so you're, knowing how to make the herbal products in a safe way, and making sure you're kind of doing due diligence to, again, just make sure that you're producing a safe product. But, for especially at home and just experimenting and all of that, definitely any herbs that you grow could go into make these things for your own use as well. And I make a lot of these things just for my personal use. So some of the places where we've sold our herbs, there's actually a local tincture company. So tincture is a shelf-stable extract of the herbs. And she sometimes orders, bulk fresh herbs from us. Like she purchased all of our reishi from us last year, and she purchased some lemon balm from us and some echinacea from us. And then she puts it into her tincture line, and she's really prioritizing sourcing locally. So that's been nice. Another thing is we've partnered with a local brewing company. She, not beer, but she makes like shrubs and vinegars and things like that. And we get a lot of fresh material to her. So she's been taking a lot of fresh hibiscus, fresh lemongrass, fresh holy basil. We've been selling some dried herbs to a local brewery. So if you've ever heard of Creature Comforts, they have several herbal beers. This one was actually made it into the newspaper. It's Tulsi beer. It's got holy basil and hibiscus. So that's been a really fun collaboration for our herbs to be in some local beers. There's a local restaurant that's selling one of our tea blends. The National is a local restaurant, and they order some bulk tea blend from us. This is Tranquility, one of our tea blends, and they make it into a latte at their restaurant that's served on their drink menu. Some other things that you could do is sell single herbs in bulk. There's a lot of people, we're actually going to start doing this on a small scale, selling like 4 ounces of single herb at a time that are dried. And, people that want to experiment at home, people that are making their own product line for clients, or, their own tea blend, something like that. So here are some different options for that. And I guess that's kind of just an overview. I know there's like all of these things I could have gone into a long time, and I tried to not dwell too long on one thing. But if anyone has any questions or clarification, or wants me to go into anything that I talked about a little bit more in depth, definitely let me know. And just the last thing, if you want to check out our website and look at the products that we make, we're about to launch our online website, and it will be sales online for in-person pickup. So probably most of you wouldn't be able to get products from us, but you can see, what types of things we're making and learn more about the herb program. And then I also share a lot of information on my Instagram at I am Noelle Joy about my research and what we're doing at the farm. And then if any of you want to email me later, with more questions, if we don't have time today, you can email me at noellejoy@uga.edu. And that's it.
I've got a list of some of the questions that are in the chat. Let me run through these questions. The first one I think on here was, is a good dehydrator, will that work for small batches?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
So with the dehydrator, we did a study once where we put a temperature or a thermometer in there, and even when you set it to 95, it'll cycle up to like 115 Fahrenheit, and then the heater will turn off and all that. So you can definitely dry in a good quality dehydrator. I guess it depends on the dehydrator you're using, but you can definitely dry in there. Just make sure you don't leave herbs in there too long. As long as you get them out as soon as they're dry, and they still look vibrant, then that works great.
Is sweet basil harvested the same as holy basil?
Good question. Holy basil is in the same family as sweet basil, but it's a different species. So it's a different plant. It's my favorite medicinal herb. I probably could have gone into more detail, but it's a medicinal herb from India, actually. It tastes very different than culinary basil, and you harvest it in flower, where culinary basil or sweet basil is different. You want to harvest it before it flowers. But holy basil medicinally is used as an adaptogen. So that means it's a medicinal herb that can help your body adapt to stress and reduce the negative effects of stress. So yeah, if anyone wants to check it out, it's a really wonderful medicinal herb.
Well, we've got another couple questions. One is, do you have any recommendations for cultivars, varieties that are in the parsley family, parsley, dill, fennel, etc., that do not bolt, or at least don't bolt as fast?
To be honest, I don't work a lot with those culinary herbs. We do get specific varieties from Johnny's. They have some seeds that are less, what's the word? Susceptible to bolting, I guess. But what we're experimenting with is just trying to grow them at a different time of year. So like I said, sowing them at the end of, or kind of sowing them in the summer, planting them at the end of summer, and then harvesting them kind of later on in the fall, instead of trying to grow them throughout the summer, if that makes sense. And that's different, like dill I could grow in the summer, basil growing in the summer, but if they're having an issue with bolting for parsley, maybe try growing it as like a fall crop instead of a summer crop. Yeah, we used to grow turmeric. Now we just grow ginger, but we kind of actually grow them in the shade. We've grown them in a lot of different ways. We did grow them in like a hoop house, but now we're just growing them in a raised box kind of on the edge of the forest where it's kind of half shaded. And are you familiar with how to get the seeds for the turmeric?
No.
So for turmeric and ginger, you can just buy any organic turmeric or ginger from the store, and you cut them up into pieces, and there's like little eyes on it, where there's like a protrusion, and you can cut it up so that so every piece has at least one of those protrusions, and you let them air dry for a couple of days to kind of heal over the wound, and then you plant them in some soil. You can do it in the ground, or you can do it in a tray in the greenhouse, or in your house or something like that, and then it'll sprout up some green shoots, and then develop roots, and then you can either grow it in a pot or grow it kind of in like a shady area and keep it moist. And then almost like potatoes, you would mound up soil around it, because the rhizome is what we're going for. So you'd mound up soil a couple times over the summer, and then basically as long as you harvest it before the first freeze, then you'll have a good harvest. So it's kind of baby turmeric and baby ginger. It's not long enough to have like a really mature rhizome, but it tastes amazing still, and you could definitely grow it like that in your area.
I have holy basil that is that perfect harvest stage you described. If I cut the boughs and then tie them or dry them flat, do I pull just the leaves to store? Can I also keep the flowers to use? What is your favorite way to use the dried holy basil?
Yeah, so when you're processing it, if you're just taking a stem that's got like leaf and flower dried, and you just run your finger down it, just whatever you collect with that. So you don't have to just pick off the leaves. You can, it's good to get some of the flower in there as well when you're processing it. And then in terms of what to do with the dried leaf and flower, I love making it into a tea. I mix it in almost all of our tea blends. We have some holy basil, so it's great in tea. But some other kind of maybe less conventional uses, I love infusing it into either jojoba or grapeseed oil and making it as like a body moisturizer. So I have a holy basil infused oil that I use as my moisturizer every day. And then another thing I love to do is putting it into like some food items. So there's I think a Thai dish that has like a holy basil, like a chicken holy basil or something like that. But I actually prefer to use it in more sweet things. So one of my favorite treats is dark chocolate mixed with some toasted coconut and some powdered holy basil leaf, and then made into kind of like a chocolate bark. So that's one of my favorite ways to make it.
Great. I think this is a follow-up to the question about hibiscus. After you dry the calyx, what can you do with it?
Oh, for that one, I mean, tea is the best. Dried hibiscus tea mixed with other things is great. So yeah, mostly tea. You can do it as a cold infusion. So I actually love making like a summer Gatorade where I'll put some dried hibiscus calyx with some sea salt and a little bit of honey and then just like a squeeze of lemon. And then I'll put that like in the fridge when I go to work in the morning. And then it's kind of like cold infused during the morning, and I'll pull it out at lunch, and it's a beautiful pink color from the hibiscus. And then I drink that as kind of like an electrolyte drink to replenish, from sweating all morning. Just regular tea, like I said, either hot or cold. And then I also love doing a hot tea, a really strong hot tea of holy basil and hibiscus, straining it out, and then adding honey and lemon and freezing it and making it into popsicles. That's like a really favorite summer snack, is like hibiscus and holy basil tea popsicles. But yeah, those are some things that I like to do with hibiscus. I was going to say there was also an article recently in the AJC that I did that had some of these like recipes in it. So I'm just looking for the link really quick, and then I can maybe just share that if people are interested in doing some herbal recipes.
How many other similar people like you? I would guess somebody in North Carolina, they've already had someone on board, a specialist, but Georgia, and maybe someday we'll have someone in Tennessee that specializes in that. But do you see it really becoming I guess at the university level?
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, personally, I'm like, yeah, that would be awesome. I like wishful thinking. My answer is 100% yes. Reality, I'm not exactly sure, but I do think hemp is kind of the gateway for this in a lot of ways, to think about kind of like what I was talking about is how we're growing it and what we're wanting to learn from it. It's a little bit different, than just like, how can I fertilize or water this to get the highest yield? And so this idea of like connecting horticulture practices to chemistry, I do think hemp is like a really good transition, like a good herb to kind of like get people thinking about that in that way. So, and there are a lot of programs, a lot of universities doing some kind of hemp program. So I do think it's going to continue to increase, but I don't know, some of that might just be wishful thinking. But if that's the basis, then 100% yes. Yeah, we only have about 40 people in the state growing this year, but they didn't even open up licensing applications until March this year. So they're also in Georgia, they're just making it really difficult for people that want to grow hemp. So I think they're kind of purposely trying to not have a lot of people doing it, but hopefully in the coming years, it'll become easier. But for now, we actually don't have a lot of people growing in Georgia.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, I just really enjoyed being able to share. And like I said, if anyone did want to reach out to me and ask more questions, you can email me or message me on Instagram. I'm in at least within a week, I'll get back to you. So
Fantastic.
well, thank you. Have a great rest of your day to you and everyone else who logged on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks everybody.